Today we're going to have a little bit of a breakdown on the different types of feathers that we use for collaring, in specific, salmon and steelhead flies. After one of the last posts on comets, a lot of questions came up about what we use and in what application, and I want to show you some of the options. For my personal, we've got a whole bunch of different types of feathers here on the table. We've got a rooster saddle patch. We have a sub-saddle patch. We have a soft hackle, wide webby soft hackle feather from Metz. We've got Schlappen, which is an old standard especially for tying spey type flies. And then we've got strung Chinese saddle hackle, which is the most economic for most tyers to purchase. Each has their advantages and disadvantages. But basically what we're looking for in the feather is just a wide, webby feather that we can make a couple wraps of hackle at the front of the fly to just, have that great looking finishing touch on there. A lot of breathing movement with that feather. As it goes, all of these have good applications and can be used in the same way. Some of them are easier to use than others. For instance, this soft hackle here, it has really wide webby feathers, but you don't really have as big a size range. It works really well for salmon steelhead type of applications. As you can see, we've got a wider, webbier hackle. We can reduce the size to some degree to get down into smaller flies by tying in from the tip as opposed to tying in from the back. But the nice thing about this feather is, yes, it has the wide webby, but it also has a really nice soft stem that's easy to wrap on the hook. Next, we have the China sub saddle. This here is it's a slightly less perfect feather, coming from birds that are probably, factory seconds, let's just call them that. Not that there's anything wrong with it, it's just that the overall quality of the feather isn't as good. As you can see here, we've got nice, wide, webby hackle here by the stem, and then we've got points, a little bit finer tip out to the side. Now, this stuff towards the base, towards the fluff of the feather, is going to be very good for hackling these types of flies, for salmon steelhead stuff. Whereas the tips probably aren't going to be as nice. But with a little bit of picking through a relatively inexpensive neck, you're definitely going to be able to get the feathers that you're looking for. My personal choice for doing this type of work, and mainly as a time consideration, is this saddle patch. And the reason why is it has wide webby feathers, relatively soft stems, but the critical thing for me is that I can go into the band of feathers and I can pull out a dozen feathers off of say one particular row of feathers, if you will, and tie my dozen or dozens of flies off that without having to spend a bunch of time sorting through feathers in order to make it happen. So, if you're the guy at home who's going to tie up a dozen comets over the course of the fall, buying a relatively expensive neck, it may not be for you. Where the strung Chinese saddle hackle comes into play. Relatively inexpensive. Again, you're going to have to pick and sort a little bit through the feathers maybe. The overall quality is going to be similar to that of the sub, with some Schlappen type feathers, and we'll get into that in just a second, but also some skinnier stuff in there too. So if your demands aren't such that you need to tie many dozens over the course of the season, this is for sure going to be your option. If you were, say, tying bigger spey flies, the Glasso series type of fly, the Schlappen is going to be a better choice for you. It has really wide webby feathers, and that's going to give you that real classic swept back spey fly look. It's almost like a soft hackle feather that's going to be 4 inches long, as opposed to just being 2.5, something like that. Another option, generally speaking, for comets and stuff like that, I don't think that you're going to find enough usable feather in this deal for that particular application. It will work, and if you were going to do a bunch of crossover between, say, comets and, again, like big Schlappen spey type flies, this would be a great choice for you. Again, you might have to pick through it a little bit more. It's going to make a little bit more work for you in the long run, but still, a decent option at an affordable price. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab a couple of these feathers. We're just going to do some different techniques as far as collaring goes. I'm not going to bother to go into a whole fly, but just basically show how to wrap those feathers onto the hook in we'll say 2 different styles. So I'm just going to start my thread behind the eye. Again, we're not going into a pattern or anything here, but we're just going to demonstrate a couple techniques. Start my thread there. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to use that Metz soft hackle, wide, webby, thin-stemmed, and we are going to snip off the fluff section. We're going to slick back the tips a little tiny bit so that we expose that little bit skinnier material, and we talked about that when we were going through the feathers just a minute ago. Again, these are wider, webbier feathers, and if you want to capitalize on the smaller diameters, you're probably going to have to tie it in from the tip. So what we'll do is we'll expose that little tiny tip. We'll just take a wrap or 2 of thread on there. Take our handy dandy hackle clip, and then we're just going to, let's get our thread over here. Just going to kind of wrap this around the shank. As we're doing it, we're just going to kind of take those feathers and pull them out of the way. About 3 wraps usually, most steelhead applications. Don't want to make it the fly so heavily hackled that it won't sink. So a little bit of cleanup work. There you have kind of that classic comedy, swept back, slightly smaller follicles. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to advance this thread forward back up into what would be really truly the classic collar position. I'm going to take, this is off of the rooster saddle patch. I'm going to snip off the fluff. I'm going to expose the stem just a little tiny bit, give myself a little access to tie in, a little handle. We're just going to lay that on top of the shank. Ooh. Neat little deal here, actually got a self-threading bobbin, not such a bad thing to have, especially when that type of activity takes place. Again, we're going to tie that stem right on top. Again, we're going to take our hackle pliers. And this time we're going to wrap, and as we wrap again, we're just going to kind of slick those feathers back. And again, this is like the comet, tying basic steelhead flies like skunks, things like that. That's how all that hackle is applied. Make 3 wraps, come over the top of the stem, make a couple of confining wraps so that you don't have your thread slip on you. Snip off the excess, make a couple confinement wraps just in front of where we tied the hackle off, and again, there we have that kind of brushy, slightly swept back, wide, nice looking hackle. A couple different ways to do some hackling. I hope that this helps with breaking down the feather selection for you. Of course, people here at the Caddisfly are more than happy to help you out should you need help choosing feathers. Hope that helped.